Building the Future, Green Building in the New Millennium, brought to you by Sustainable Homes of the Future. Our natural world is in crisis. Buildings emit 40% of carbon globally. We need solutions now. Join the conversation today. Welcome, everyone, to Building the Future, Green Building in the New Millennium, a podcast about everything sustainability related in the built environment and sometimes beyond, depends on the guest. I'm very lucky today to have with me Drew Pedrick, who is the founding principal of McTigue Architecture. Conscious architecture is your tagline, and I'll ask you more about that in a little bit. I noticed from your, just doing a little bit of research, LinkedIn page and whatnot, that you started McTigue Architecture a while ago and then stopped it, or maybe not. That's sort of my question, I guess. And then you worked for some other firms and did a bunch of other stuff and then came back to it. So I'm curious, this is a twofold question, I guess. First off, give us a little bit of a rundown of how you started it originally and how it blossomed into what it is today. And then also, how has just architecture in general and sustainable architecture or conscious architecture, your term, how has that evolved over your 35 plus years as an architect? And also, didn't want to fail to mention that Drew is a LEED AP certified and AIA architect. So
thank you.
Not just a designer, but an actual architect. Here he is, Drew Pedrick. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Ian. And thank you. It was really kind of you to say 35 plus.
I stole that off your LinkedIn summary. Sorry.
Close to 40, actually. Been a long time, and I actually stopped using it's like somebody with age, right? I'm not going to say what my age is. I'm just going to say it's something plus, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You have your 30th birthday for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. So, but I've really loved what I am someone who loves what he does, thankfully, because I've been doing it a long time, and for conscious decisions, so to speak, to practice architecture. I started out as a young kid. I really fell into loving architecture. So it was passion from about 11 years old or thereabouts, and had sort of an arts interest, science interest, and it all kind of came together. And I studied architectural engineering because it seemed to make a lot of sense to me that it would be great to have both a lot of engineering, structural and systems and construction and all that, along with all the architecture and design studios and anthropology and art history, all that stuff. So it's great foundation for me to start out with.
Sort of a cross-disciplinary in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And the program I went to is it's thriving today. I'm very close to the people at Penn State where
Nice.
I did this program, and really great. And I'm passionate about the idea. But I started out as a lighting designer, and the first 5 years, that's what I did at my grandfather's firm in New York. He had long since passed away, but I was there, and then went on to architecture. And somewhere along the way, I had a boss who said, "You're going to start a practice of your own." I can feel it. And so sure enough, I did in the early 90s, began a practice. And about 3 years into it, I got invited to do some product design. At the same time, I was running the architecture practice, and product design for us, which was lighting fixtures, became a wonderful opportunity for us to deal with scale at a crazy level, because we were doing buildings, we were doing offices, we were doing houses. And now we're looking at the nuts, the bolts, and the screw type that's inside a light fixture, or how to cast aluminum to make a certain shape.
Wow.
And then from there we got into photographing the products. And then from that, we got into desktop publishing to create catalogs for the company that we were hired by. And in that whole trajectory, I started another firm to do that work, and I called that McTigue. And I call it McTigue because that's my middle name. It's an Irish heritage, and I just at that time thought that the craft, the guild, the sort of the effort, the work that goes into creating products, that just somehow or other connected with my Irish heritage. Like I thought that was so cool. So McTigue. So cool. I did that a long time, and then closed it all down, both the architecture, which was another name, and McTigue, closed it all down and went to work for a very large firm, international firm. Was there for 7 years, did a whole variety of project types. It was at that firm that I got LEED certified. So I had always been practicing what we now refer to as sustainable design. Back then, there were other terms.
Organic architecture was one that was been around for a while, right?
Right. Organic architecture, design with nature, environmental architecture, energy. Energy was our big topic, really. When I was running the practice, I interviewed for and got to do a branch bank for a local savings and loan as a project. It was a very fun project in Darien, Connecticut, right in their main street. And in the interview process, I said to the CEO something about sustainability. What we were calling it then was something different. I was talking about all this in the environment and materials, and he just, his eyes glazed over, kind of, like.
I've had that experience as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I realized that this is not going well for me to get this project, right? So I zipped my lips and went back to talking about how we can get it done quickly and cost effectively, and very appropriate things with a banker to talk about.
Right.
And I got, we got hired, and so we did the project, and we just my team and I went about designing it the way we felt was right, in addition to obviously suiting the client's needs and all that. So at the end of the project, when we had the ribbon cutting ceremony, opened the branch bank, it was nicely received. I looked at the CEO and I said, "John, I have a question for you. The utility company would like to know where the rebate check should go, to me or to you?"
So that was sly. That was really sly. That's good.
And he said, "What rebate check are we talking about?" And I said, "Well, we just designed all these things in a way that you got a utility rebate because we used the best energy. We did our energy consumption work and we lowered it. So he said, "Yeah, that check goes to me."
You didn't take 10% or anything like that.
No, I didn't take, no. But what was interesting was at that time, and this was the 90s, the perspective that I took and we took, as architects in Connecticut, a lot of us, was we had to look at it from a philosophical perspective, sustainable design, but we had to look at it from a financial perspective. And so the people that we needed to have aligned with us or aligned mutually was the CFO in an organization. The CEO was like, if the CFO was okay, that was great, right? If we didn't have the CFO's backing for this, then it was seen as a cost addition as opposed to a cost benefit. And so that model has, of course, it's still there today. We always were concerned about first cost and life cycle cost and cradle to cradle and all those things. But at that time, that was really a primary issue, was first cost. Now it's so much more.
Yeah.
So it's shifted and changed a lot.
And if I could just ask a quick question here, what was did you have a pitch for the CFO? I mean, did you just try to keep it talking about the numbers and not so much about the energy side of things, or were you actually doing the cost cycle analysis and the payback period and things like that, even at that time?
We would, as a team, we would provide that if cost analysis work, paybacks, ROIs, all that. We would do it. We didn't do it directly as architects because what we wanted to make sure was that all of our cost structures were really thought of, well researched,
Mhm.
in the marketplace. And that'd be a lot to put on our plates as well, to make sure that all the costing is really market leveling and aware.
Especially
So
at that time.
especially at that time, right? I mean, today you can look up on Google, and you can
Yeah.
find out the average cost of this material.
Yeah.
Then we would go to a book, RS means, big thick thing like this, and go like, you look through the pages and go, okay, it says that, but it's all these things about the area you're in, and don't use this number as a whole too. So we would hire cost consultants at the time. And the engineers would help with us. So we did energy analysis work as a team. We did cost analysis work as a team, but we generally didn't pitch directly to a CFO. It would, at best, it would be if we were in the room with a group of 3 or 4 people at the top,
Mhm.
and that person was included. So
Very cool. And
yeah.
how has that changed? Like now for your, well, I'll let you continue your timeline, because I know you worked for Aecom for a little bit, and versus what you're doing right now with your own business. I mean, that is a huge, multi-level, very, they've got everything. They're doing design, they're doing construction, they're doing, financing, they're doing the whole gamut. So I assume that was a learning experience for you as well.
It sure was. It sure was. And I'll come back around to answer that question by way of
Sure.
explaining that when I closed my practice down, I did so to join a company that was not as large as Aecom, but comparable.
Mhm.
A consulting, an international consulting business, and they're a business. Shareholders, all that. They really operated that way. It's the right thing to do for them.
Yeah.
So what they wanted to do was they wanted to grow architecture, and in the late '90s, they kind of set out on this path to do that. They had architects in their offices. They had about, let's say, 10,000 people in the firm,
Wow.
mostly U.S., a little bit of international, and they hired 7 of us around the U.S. to help them grow architecture. And so I ended up in the Southeast region, leading architecture and building engineering for the region for certain business lines, and that was great experience. I was there for 7 years. We did everything from offices to sewage treatment plants,
Wow.
which you can imagine have a really their own, let's just say, their own architecture.
Yeah.
Not a lot, but we
One
did
that,
all.
if you haven't worked in, I'm sure required a decent amount of kind of getting up to speed on that.
Yeah, this was very technical work in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But it was very satisfying, too, right? But along the path, we got asked once by our office in Jacksonville if we could do a cruise ship terminal, and I was the lead. They called me up, said, "Hey, Drew, can you guys do a cruise ship terminal?" And of course, without missing a beat, what did I say? Yeah,
Of course. Yeah. Let's do it.
we could do that. Sure. And I said that actually because we had a transportation business group, and we were doing rail stations and things like that. So we understood people movement, we understood the traffic flow and all that. So it was a bit of a stretch, but not too far. That project for the Port of Jacksonville, we completed it. It was a study, basically. About a year after we did that, this firm I was with bought a small firm that did cruise ship terminals. And so I was asked to be the architect in the transition of bringing them on board. And so I started to do cruise ship terminals, and found out that they were really mad that we got that project and they didn't. And
Oh, really?
so
That's funny.
we became fast friends. To this day, we, many years later, are really close friends, and we've done a lot of projects together. I had the opportunity from that point to now to have done about 27 or so cruise ship terminal projects around the US and overseas.
Wow.
Hong Kong, Singapore concept design, competition winners actually in China, and a lot of stuff that didn't get built and a lot of stuff that did get built. So in that process, sorry, I'm telling a long story, but in that process,
That's a fascinating one. I have lots of questions.
yeah,
but I'll let you keep going for a little bit.
Yeah, so that company decided that architecture was really not, not like the greatest return on their investment. Our margins seem to be tighter than other business lines. Like an engineering business line that did a sewage treatment plant or a highway could make much better margins. Because as we always would say, I'm sorry to any listeners who feel otherwise, but we always would say, if you design the first foot of a highway, you kind of got
it. Hey, that's true. I've never thought about that, but yeah.
Me to say, actually, I'm sure, because I know there's a lot more, involved. But we was okay. Of course they can make more money, And so anyway, the firm decided architecture was not such a strong element of their whole overall business direction. So we all began to move on. And I moved on from that point over to Aecom because of the cruise ship work and because of their need to add new principal to their LA office, LA design studio, and timing was great. It worked out wonderfully. And I ended up there and really loved it. I was there for 5 years. My first project, which stayed all the way through, was the LA Police Department headquarters, which was, I think the largest vertical construction building that the city of Los Angeles had done in a really long time, maybe as much as 50 years. And how lucky was I, to be running that project. It had actually mostly been designed already when I came on board, but I led it through the rest of design and construction, and turned out really well. But it's very, very intense working with the city of Los Angeles, and at the time, Mayor Villaraigosa, who in the midst of construction decided that all projects for the city of Los Angeles, all building projects, would have to be designed to LEED Silver or better. And we were under contract. Yeah, it was an interesting mandate. So so sustainability, here we are. Yeah. Now sustainability is coming in as a contractual imperative. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just a goal. It was like, no, you have to do this. That has to happen.
Well, for the first time, it probably wasn't you guys, the architects, being like, hey, we can, here are some options for how we can do this. It's the other way around. It's a client actually, telling you, hey, this is
telling us, you better do this, because that's our goal. We're going to make this happen. Are you on board?
What year was that?
That was 2007.
Okay. Yeah. That's that wheelhouse. That 2006, 2007 was when everybody kind of on the government end started to say, oh yeah, net zero is possible and, probably necessary for the survival of our cities and country.
Absolutely. And everything that goes with all that, there's a lot of, we can get into this discussion, but there's a lot of checking boxes in something like certifications, like LEED, which is a little questionable potentially in terms of people's motivations. Right? Is this really about designing something that's designed holistically, integrated, really embodying all those things which in fact build to sustainability? Or are we looking at the back end of it and saying, hey, we want to be this score in sustainability, so go get those things done.
Right.
The city was taking a bit of that position, but they had to do that. They had to say, this better happen to all their people and to us. Mm-hmm. Well, we thought that was great, but it was also really scary because we had been designing the building to be LEED certified. Now the city was saying to us, in construction, this has to be silver at least.
Oh man!
So the first thing we did was we sat down and we had a charrette.
Yeah.
A charrette, a session, a working session of all the necessary people in the project, important people, and figure out how can we get to silver. And what we found through the process was, there's a chance we can get to platinum.
Wow.
And we were kind of like, well, that's surprising. Wow, like pat on the back. Well, if we think we can get to platinum. And so I can tell this now because it's like project's long done. In that room, which included people from the city, we all went like, no, we're not going to say that. Don't say that to anybody, right? Because we didn't want to set that bar right up there, right? Like that, it might happen, but we don't want to try to impose that as something has to happen. And it costs a lot of money. At that time, going from LEED certified to LEED platinum was something you really almost couldn't do for a project that was already designed. Keep in mind, this building, 500,000 square foot building on an entire city block with levels of parking and security as police headquarters below ground, very imposing structure in a way. It was already designed. Now we have to change it. How far can we change it when the hole's already dug out there? An enormous hole in the city, right across from City Hall. Like, make it more sustainable. Really?
So what were some of those strategies? Like, what were the big 3 strategies that you guys were looking at that point? For how to, I mean, clearly you had some, because you were going from certified to, potentially platinum. How were you able to realize that, or how were you able to think through that?
Well, we looked at the entire list, of course, and we did a session where we said, kind of A, B, or C, yes, no, and maybe, that sort of thing.
And kind of ran all those possible scenarios and
then we all kind of broke out and went, okay, so the engineers would go, look at, is it too late to change the mechanical systems, or to what extent can they change these systems, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And if they do that, what happens to the energy usage? Can we really drop that adequately? Mm-hmm. That's one thing. Another one was, where do we get power from? What's the utility source? Can it be renewable? Yeah. And that, which ultimately ended up being one of our points, was a challenge for the city, not us. Because where you get your power, of course, is the utility structure. Mm-hmm. And the utility structure was just getting to the point where they could consider offering renewable power. Because the grid was, at that point, 2007, 8, and 9, the grid was really becoming more sophisticated and allowing for power sources to come into the grid that were renewable. Not only were they actually coming online, but were the technology systems in place to account for that power being in the system in a way that people could legitimately say, we are designating this percentage of our utility costs to be based on renewable sources, which is like, there's a lot of electrons flying around in the power grid. How do you know where they're coming from? You have you have
to have that infrastructure in place, and that program in place. Yeah,
right? It's a human exercise in establishing a method that accounts for it.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it was.
And it's worth mentioning that I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Los Angeles and California in general tend to be on the leading edge of renewables, clean energy, things like that. So I imagine that was probably something specific that Los Angeles was doing at that time that maybe not every city in the country was wrestling with or was mandating. I don't know for sure.
I would say LA at that time, LA was in a really great position to do what they needed to do to get past what had been old methodologies, old standards, old business and operational structures to go into this new world. And this project happened to be one of those, which was catalytic, for the utility, for LADWP to
a turning point for sure.
It was definitely part of the the battle, the aircraft carrier turning. And that was fascinating for us to watch that, because first we thought, well, that's an easy one, wind power, right? It's right over the line. It's like not even over the line. Like just drive to Palm Springs; they're all over the place.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was one, and energy usage was another, and then the third one was materiality and material choices and recycled content, and following the chain of custody of materials through to account for it and all that. Which, when you look at a city like Los Angeles, like any city really, but it's a big city, how do they account for the process of accepting materials that they have not used before and accounting for the content correctly? So it can be, we can document that after the fact. That material, 35% recycled content, great. This material had 10, this material had, whatever. And then sort of the whole waste cycle as well. So that required the Department of Building and Safety. That required Public Works. That required the fire department. That required everybody to go, we're on board. We're going to do this. And so it was really a great challenge.
In some ways, that project really paved the way. I mean, it wasn't just a turning point, but literally, like, from a administrative angle, it kind of paved the way for some of the legislation and some of the mandates that have now come down since, including, Title 24, to be super topical and specific.
Very much.
To 2020.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, and
that's
to
great.
See how, if you come into the city of Los Angeles with a project today, a sustainable project that uses materials that are, let's say, what would have been a bit unique back then. Today, it's just part of the nature, right? Okay, so yeah, projects like that, which was a very big building, well over $200 million, a total project cost with everything included of over $400 million. So that was a big project for the city. And we were always wondering through the processes, are we going to get there, right? LEED certified, LEED silver was the goal. We were mum about that platinum possibility. Well, we got LEED gold.
Gold, nice, okay.
So we're all beside ourselves that we knew we could get it as we went through the process, because everybody was engaged, including the construction firm, which you really can't get LEED certified if you don't have a construction firm that's really engaged in it as well and partnering with you and understands that how important it is. So there's to me, it's a really great moment for me personally, and there's a photograph I have of me and the chief of police at the ribbon cutting with the LEED plaque behind us.
That's awesome.
It turned out it was a fake LEED plaque. We didn't have the real one. We actually had to make, make one.
You called Hollywood. You called some set decorators in Hollywood and said, "Hey, we need a fake LEED."
Plaque. Had it right in the snap.
That's awesome. One of the things you mentioned, and we'll, I guess, eventually get around to the end of the timeline here, but one of the things you mentioned when you were talking about having done train stations and I assume, train stations, cruise terminals, a police, a public municipal building that's obviously going to have a lot of foot traffic, was that you guys were sort of thinking about the flow of people. And that's really cool to hear, because I think that's unique to those larger style or municipal or, transportation related projects where I'm curious, in your current architecture firm where you're doing mainly single family, I assume, I'm sure you have other stuff too, but.
Yeah, a mix of commercial and residential.
It's a mix.
Yep.
But you're probably, even in a commercial environment, there's some flow involved. But you're looking at maybe one little chunk of it and saying, okay, how are we going to manage this retail space? How are we going to manage this restaurant space or whatever? Whereas you're not looking at an entire building necessarily and saying, how is this flow of people going to be, it's almost more ominous in that larger building. What are some of the things that you're taking into consideration there? What does it look like to think about the flow of people in a building?
Yeah. And you hit it very well. Thank you. The difference between a large building and the size of buildings we're working on today. Yeah, the the quantities of people are obviously that is the difference primarily, is the quantities involved. For instance, I did before I left Aecom, I did the renovations to the headquarters of the Port of Los Angeles. And when we were, a lot of our work was focused on the public spaces. We were changing the approach coming into the building, and this was a 1979 building that people at the time we were doing this were saying, we're tired of this, it's an old building, and 1980, like, that's an old building. Arguably
it is now. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, arguably old. It kind of is, but our goal was to help them breathe a new life into this building and to make it more appropriate to how people use a building like that today, and the presentation of the Port of Los Angeles to kind of to the world. They're one of the largest ports in the world and one of the largest economies in the world. Just them, so they had a lot invested in how they would present themselves in this process. So lucky us, we get to present them. And so part of presenting them was, of course, being that they are also a security risk, because you can only imagine what would happen if something bad happened at the Port of Los Angeles. Trade, all those billions, could be jeopardized. So security was a huge issue, and so what we had to do was we had to figure out how to make the lobby really a wonderful space to come into and enjoy, not anything like it had been before, which was a small and dark space that you never wanted to sit inside there. It was just a means to get to somebody's office. We had to make it an engaging space, a space for people to be able to sit and wait and comfortably and enjoy the presentation of what that port meant to them and to the world. So we had to locate a security desk. We had to do all these elements of having security, but we needed to have flow through. So we did, first time we've done this, we did a full-on pedestrian simulation, computerized simulation of all of the foot traffic through the building in like 4 or 5 different scenarios of very busy to very light. And so we had this data set of like videos of little dots, flowing through and where they would gather. And it's all about human nature and how people, how people experience their environment. How does one person, well, how do 125 people, when they're all together trying to come in the door? And so we designed that building, to make sure that there was a certain maximum lag time from the point you got out of your car and stepped onto the curb and before you got on the elevator. And so that's the most sophisticated way we've done it. Since then, I did a cruise terminal project with other very large firms in Hong Kong, and we used similar simulation software then to analyze 10,000 people going through a building and getting off 2 big, massive ships and getting out to taxis.
And is it just on the subway in Hong Kong where they like push people in with sticks, or is it were you simulating that as well with this?
We didn't use the stick
approach. Stick method.
Like, we get a few more in. So what if you paid for that cruise, right?
10,001. Here we go.
Get on there, quick! The ship's leaving. Yeah, they're pretty amazing how they deal with traffic, with people.
Well, and was the cultural? I mean, I'm assuming the cultural aspect was something to be taken into consideration. Did you consult with sort of people about the culture and like how close, closeness, proximity? How? I mean, here we are talking about proximity and stuff, and it's wild considering the times we're in. But I'm curious because I know a lot of those folks wear masks, already, and there's a certain proximity that's assumed there that maybe isn't assumed in America, where we have more space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was in Hong Kong 6 times for this project, and most of the time, if I was going to take the subway, there were people with masks, and that was 2009.
Yeah.
So even then, that was the norm, and it was obviously because of air pollution. And what Hong Kong tends to suffer, or tended, was a sort of stifling kind of quality to the air. The lack of flow of air. So that was a big issue for them. And so the air quality was just like, okay, buses and cars and taxis all going down the street. Well, the air doesn't go anywhere. So their degree of pollution was not necessarily related specifically to the amount of traffic. It was the fact that the air wasn't going anywhere. And New York City is a somewhat similar, but if you look at New York City and Hong Kong, they are vastly different. Yet we look at New York as being a very dense, probably our densest city in the United States, right?
Yeah.
So that was an issue for them there. Coming off of a cruise ship, it was not that. It was safe passage. We want you to enjoy yourself. When you're leaving the cruise ship, we want you to get out safely and efficiently. And we as designers want to satisfy the tourism aspect of this, that people, if they think, well, I'm going to go on a cruise again, where should I go? Yeah, I want to go to Hong Kong. That was great. Or never again.
Yeah.
So
creating that memorable experience, that positive, memorable experience.
Yeah. But, and this is interesting, maybe, pertinent today, one of the things that we had to do was we had to provide a way for every passenger coming off of a ship, and again, these are a maximum of like 5,000 passengers, every one of them could have their temperature taken as they pass by someone with one of those little point and shoot, thermometers, right?
Fascinating.
And so they would pull someone out of line if they caught that their temperature was outside the range.
Wow.
And so there was a whole health check that they did. And so when we look at COVID today, this was 2009, so this is 11 years ago, we designed a building to allow them to do that. So that's become a norm in a lot of places. Internationally, that's a more of an issue. In the US, we hadn't previously been doing health checks.
That might be a really good skill to have on your resume come the next couple of years. With bigger buildings over here.
Yeah, so that it's kind of fascinating when you look at the work that we're doing now. And one of the larger projects we worked on was the legacy headquarters for DaVita Corporation in El Segundo. This is a few years ago. About 50,000 square feet. Really houses about 225 employees. So that's not very much, really, when you think of what we were just talking about.
Right.
But that, we were very concerned about flow in that building. We were very concerned about how are people experiencing the building when they come in. Do they have an intuitive appreciation for where they're going next and why? And we looked at what had been. We did a renovation, basically, of the whole space to suit the new needs. And what we looked at was, wow, where is it really confusing here? And where is it really small when it should be large? Where is it closed where it should be open? Where does it need to be private and quiet so it's productive? And where is it okay to be boisterous and energetic and and lively? And so
when asking those questions, how have things changed? Now that you have so many new tools, you have building information modeling, you have all these new energy modeling tools, all these new simulation tools. How has that discussion or that conversation changed from the days where it was just a couple guys around a table, with pencils and protractors and draft paper?
Well, one way is that our ability to incorporate new information is, it's just like there's no comparison today to what it was like then. For obvious reasons, the amount of information that we have at our hands, as quickly as we can put it in our hands, which is instantaneously, pretty much, right? We can make use of that. So back in earlier days, right? It took effort and time to determine, to research something and to determine what the factors were, let's say, in a condition, and then make assumptions, draw conclusions from that and design around it. The good part of that was that ideas gestated, so that they had time to evolve as we went along and grow and mature to something. So maybe in some ways we might have felt more assured because we spent more time with it as human beings, to the extent that we, can comprehend things and work through problems collectively. We had the time. Mm-hmm. Today, as you, I'm sure with your reading and otherwise, the ability for us to comprehend the information is way behind the amount of information that exists.
It's all data, it's all analytics now, and somebody can plug a number in and say, oh, well, this is going to be the result. And what's interesting is that may or may not be true, because yes, numbers don't lie, when you're talking about financials and when you're talking about certain things. But when it comes, architecture at the end of the day is an art. It's design. It's not just numbers. There's science and math and all that involved, as you mentioned. But yeah, I do wonder sometimes if it's almost like, in the attempt to sort of move things forward, you've almost dumbed things down slightly, to the point where maybe you're not getting all of the information. You think you've got more information than you could possibly handle, but in fact, you're maybe missing a couple things. And so it's probably good to have the old guard around that remembers those times and says, wait, hold on, maybe we should give this another, another pass or another thought.
Yes. It's a little like, as we're looking at vaccines for the coronavirus, the scientific method mm-hmm. versus the political immediacies, mm-hmm. right? It's good. This is almost certainly to be a cure, right? Oh, absolutely. We hear all this kind of talk. Let's start buying, let's start making that stuff. Whereas the scientists are saying, oh God, oh man, we really have to, go through this process because it needs to go through these steps. When you look at buildings, and you look at architecture, which of course last a long time, we really don't like to be wrong. That's awful. The worst thing you can do is design something that lasts that you don't like.
Yeah, I know. Your name's going to be on it for all of eternity. Yeah.
Right.
100 plus years or whatever.
It's almost better to design something you love that's going to fall apart than design something you hate that's built to last.
That's funny. I wanted to take us and kind of transition a little bit over from, we were talking about flow in the larger buildings, and but I'm curious because you and I met, our company, and my boss was doing a design, and you were the architect for the design, and you guys, I know, had a lot of discussions in designing that project about flow, and that was a single family home. So how does that approach, what you've, the bigger buildings that you worked on with the larger firms, cruise terminals and all that, how do you distill that down and actually apply that to a smaller building or a smaller space? Is it easier? Is it harder? What are the tools that you use to kind of, because at the end of the day, when we're talking about sustainability, we're going to get into more sort of like specific things there, but we're talking about sustainability. You're trying to manage flow, because the more compartmentalized the space is, the more mechanical ventilation and, all of these systems that you have to have. And so if you can simplify the design to some degree, I imagine that you can simplify some of the systems and therefore some of the energy, and that's a method certainly of efficiency as well. It's not just, oh, we want it to flow so that it feels nice. It's like, this is actually going to give you some feedback energy wise as well. Yes.
And that house, that house, when we look at flow, we looked at flow from, let's say a few different ways. We thought about the word flow. The one was obviously the occupants of that home.
Mm-hmm.
We would want that flow to have a value to it that maybe we can't prescribe specifically because we don't know exactly who that owner is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
So we're guessing a little bit. So if we imagined ourselves as being the person living in that space, how would that be?
Mm-hmm.
And by that I mean how would it feel? How would it be comfort-wise? How would it create what we think of it? Would it satisfy our values that we apply to a residence, to a home? Would it satisfy those those values?
Mm-hmm.
So would there be a great sense of entry? What would that feel like? Would that be formal and processional? And very specific. You come here and you stop and you go through and there's another and processional and you've got options or would it be more organic?
Mm-hmm.
And we spent a lot of time actually on the difference between grid and organism. So if you like a grid, plans are one thing, but when you look organically at things and how nature does things, it's not a grid, right? There's a whole other way, and look how well nature works. So
biomimesis, biophilia, like those are terms that that I've heard thrown around a lot in the green building and the sustainable architecture space. I mean, even down to what we've talked in some of our podcasts about color, and I mean, you're talking more shape, but color
mm-hmm.
and texture, and I mean, all of these different senses that we have as human beings.
Yeah, exactly. We actually superimposed both. We actually attempted to integrate the two different ways of looking at it.
Very cool.
So if you look at just imagine the circle and the plus sign in your mind, and you put them together, and then you imagine you're doing this entirely through a 2,000 square foot floor plan that is mimicked up and mimicked down. So you've got vertical as well, that nature to work with too. But you look at how those two work with each other. So the sense of that house was really attempting to have a degree to which it looked contextually appropriate for its neighborhood, for its environment, and its scale. That you had a certain amount of procession and feeling of I'm going through a gate and I'm stepping up and I'm turning and I'm coming to the door. But as you did that and you went through, and Ian, you've seen these plans, so I don't have to tell you in detail.
Yeah, exactly.
The sense of being able, the feeling to be able to flow off into the kitchen, and from the kitchen straight out, or not straight, but let's say organically. Out into the patio, into that interior courtyard, and up to the spa, and back through the rear. And so all of the flow was thought of not with like straight lines. All the flow was thought of as branches of a tree, and that kind of thing. That cool. More analogous to that.
I like that.
That way.
And how many projects are you really going that deep on when it comes to single family homes? Is that a norm, or is it like sort of one in five, or if you had to guess?
It's very in a way it's every project, but in other ways that's very singular. And I mean that was a confluence of a client, a project, a team, a time period, right? All work together to create that, and we can copy that. We can mimic that. We can expand and go and do other ones like that. But it's very rare for all that to come together. For instance, we just finished a house that clients have moved into, and we never had a conversation about organic versus walls and straight lines and all that. We didn't have that conversation.
Yeah.
But we're human beings. And so the conversation becomes, well, should this be open? And does it seem right when you're in the kitchen, and do you want to look out from the kitchen and see the people who are watching TV and doing what they're doing, lounging? Do you want to have that space be where it could be just you and your kids, or you could have 20 people there and have a big party? So when you put it in that language, which is very normal language for a home, a lot of it's already there.
Yeah.
It's really what we're trying to do. And a case like that house had an existing footprint. We were taking a house, and we were essentially taking the old house away, but putting a new house in its place on the exact same footprint with many of the same features. So our limits were definitely much greater than saying, we have a property, it's this big, and the house is going to be that big. What do we want to do? Right. So we have a house in, it's a fire rebuilt house that we're working on right now. And we're just shifting from a direction we had been going, which was to use the old footprint, which seemed to make sense. We're rebuilding from the fire, to saying the land is telling us to do something very different.
Interesting.
Let's look at the land now. And it was hard to get, in a way, to get to that point, because the urgency is like, build that house. It burnt down, put it back. Well, wait. So we're changing the flow of that house. It's a land that goes down, it goes back up. So we're using both sides. We're actually using this slope, and we're putting something over here that can look back. So it has outbuildings. So you now get an appreciation of a real three-dimensional appreciation of the entire land and the views, as opposed to, well, the house was here and it had some great views. It was okay. It was great. We loved it. No, you can have whatever you want there, really. So let's maximize. Let's look at the flow of air, the direction of light, temperature. Let's look at, the kinds of plants that are there. Let's deal with the fact that your land goes down and comes back up. So there's a natural water course at the bottom at certain times. And so, so the nature is shifting constantly from a wet year to a dry year.
And you get to actually experience that then in the design.
We want you to experience that.
Yeah.
Through the house, through what we do with the land to create a home.
That's really cool. And I mean, for anybody that's not familiar, site specific design is kind of what you're talking about. And I think that leads us into, it's about being conscious. Your tagline is conscious architecture. And I was going to ask you, basically a question of like, what do you see as the difference between conscious architecture and sustainable architecture? Is there one, or is it just sort of two different lenses through which we're kind of looking at the same idea?
Conscious architecture, I began to use that language about a year and a half ago. And it came out of a few things. One being that the maturing aspect of things like LEED certification as a tool, as LEED's been around now for 20 years, to other certifications like well building certification, living building challenge. All of these are systems that exist out there for us to make use of in terms of how we are making choices. Really.
Yeah. Set a framework for how we make those choices. Really.
Yeah, exactly. It's less about design as a core methodology. It's more a framework and a way to make choices. This takes more energy. This takes less energy. This costs more. This costs less. That kind of thing. So I was feeling like, for me, and by the way, we just finished a design concepts on a project where we were adding a third story to an old unreinforced masonry building that needed a new steel structure inserted into it, because we couldn't touch we couldn't put any weight on the brick.
Yeah.
In Los Angeles. So in an earthquake zone, in a liquefaction zone, in fact, where if there's a big earthquake, the land just becomes basically like a lake,
Wow.
So here we're putting another, we're adding to this building. How do we do that sustainably? We created a grow center so they could grow their own food. We applied atmospheric water generation equipment into it so they could make their own water.
Incredible.
And everything is being powered by the solar skin on the entire top addition. So power from the sun, water from the air, composting toilets. Nothing would be leaving this building. And so we took that project as far as our client was ready to go before he had to park for a while, and then hopefully he'll come back and do it. In that process, what I was realizing was that I think we've kind of run to the end in a way of the kind of increasing value of more and more things like LEED. I felt what was missing is more of the connectivity, more of a natural approach, more of a biological approach to design, as opposed to a more technical, more humanistic approach to design.
Which, if we're talking about building certification, is more the Living Building Challenge approach than the LEED.
Yes.
Less check boxes and more, hey, this is, holistic, as you've said, holistic a couple times, and I say that a lot too. Holistic approach. Dare I say, spiritual, even.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah. Very true. Yeah.
For the right person or the right client. Yeah.
Yeah, because there is, we could have another call on that one.
Sure. Yeah, we'll save that for part 2. Yeah.
Which is really so true. But at the same time that was happening, I also was, there's a point not uncommon in our business where we kind of have to decide whether the base of clients we have should include many of those whose goal is primarily financial, which is great, right? Business is business. We live in a capitalist world. Our transactional methodology is money.
Yeah.
That's right. That's the system we got. So I get it. But I have felt over, my own years that we're reaching a point where, the 3 legs of the stool, economic, social, and environmental, were way off balance, and they were tipping because the economic leg was gigantic. And the others couldn't keep up with that because it controlled every decision. Every decision is like, is this enough? Is this the right amount of money? Is this too much money? Is it, material choices were being made on money, basis and all that. And so what I began to think is that my team and I could shift our practice to social, followed by environmental, or maybe the other, will lead to good economics. So that says there are certain clients or certain projects we do not take on because they are primarily economic driven, and not bad necessarily, but if we're looking at the time that we have on our plates to do things that we think are valuable to our clients, let's pick those that we think are better for us and better for our planet. It's, serve a larger purpose. So as I was coming to that realization, I was also coming to the realization that there is a lot of business out there that calls itself conscious business. And there are organizations that are about conscious capitalism,
right?
Conscious investing, all of that language.
Social impact investing, yeah, things like that.
Exactly, yeah. Work that's being done at the United Nations to look at conscious development internationally, around the globe. All of that said, for me, it said, wow, so we really need to practice conscious architecture so that we are embodying those aspects of it, and we're really thinking with our clients about social and environmental values. And to those clients, and I have some who in fact I have a developer client, great fellow, great business, and that is exactly where he is. His goal is to develop things that only do so in a way that serves a good reason, good benefits to society. So that's the goal.
That's awesome. I like that. And I think what's really cool about it too is that it sets the stage for that conversation at the beginning of, meeting a potential client, even, before you've even gotten to whether or not you're going to take the project or not. You have that mandate in your business now to say, hey, we're going to have this conversation because, I don't want to just blindly say yes to something. I want to find out what your project goals are, what your, what are your top 5 elements that you care about here? Is it sustainability? Is it energy? Is it, aesthetic? Is it, there's so many different realms of architecture and building design that you get to have those conversations and in some ways kind of educate the clients a little bit as to what's possible. Because I think personally, the reason we started this podcast was to try to just keep this conversation going, especially with everything that's going on right now. We're at I think another turning point. Maybe right around 2000 or some around 2006 was a turning point where the information was out there, some of the technology and the tools were out there. A few key players, started to see it was picking up steam. But, I really feel like what you're doing and that social impact piece of just business in general, but specifically buildings and development, there's so much opportunity to make an impact. And you can't do that if you're scared to have those conversations. You can't do that if you're scared to have a client say, well, you're full of hooey. Like, I'm going to go with this other guy who's told me that they're going to bang it out in 6 months and, it's going to cost X. Like, you're looking for the right client. You're looking for somebody who wants to partner with you. And I really respect that a lot.
Thank you. Yeah. I tell you, which I found immediately once I started to really put this language out there, and to join into some organizations, like a little plug, I guess, Conscious Capitalism LA chapter. Conscious Capitalism is a national organization in the LA chapter. I joined immediately once I realized it was there, and then I went to one of their meetings, and year and a half later, I can tell you every time I'm with that group of people, it's a changing group of people because it's an organization, but every time I'm in that setting, everybody has a passion about what they're doing. So the energy is really very positive, and somebody could be making, cookies, and they're doing it in a way that a portion of their proceeds goes to help people in somewhere, inner city or in another country or something, or or in education. You take a business, and so these like a benefit corporation, like B Corporation, that has a social purpose to it as well. When you're working with people like that, there is an energy and an enthusiasm in the room that isn't necessarily in others. And there is an openness to new ways to approach a problem or a condition situation, because, this is a group of people who are already saying, wow, if I can do this, which is so cool, I'll do well enough that I can do that with it also and help those people.
And hire people and grow the business so that I can provide more jobs, more good jobs. And
yeah. There's a vertical grow business in Jackson Hole, Wyoming that I've come to know a bit about, and they hire people who who have learning disabilities and other sorts of disabilities, and that's not new. People are doing that, but when you look at how they are operating, there is such joy, such pleasure that is inside that organization, that who could say no to it? Why would you not want to work there? Why wouldn't you want to be a part of that? Look what they're doing. And so those people who were not necessarily getting trained, not getting access to things that many other people are, and we could say that's maybe a different kind of privilege, but these people who are now allowed to participate were building strengths that people didn't think they had. They were going on to take levels of responsibility, which then other people could come under them in the organization. So there's there's so many companies like that who are in this kind of space that we want to work with people who think that way. We want to work with people who live and operate that way, and do. That's the building we want to do. you know, we're doing a cannabis a business right now. And this cannabis business started by giving medical grade cannabis under medical supervision for free to people who are epileptic.
Oh, wow.
And so that, you know, it was on a trial basis, but they took those results, which were demonstrable, were very positive, and they lobbied Congress.
Wow.
And they built their business by doing that, by doing good work, you know, providing value and helping with others to change legislation to allow for something which cannabis, now it's like not really so bad, actually a great thing, right, in a lot of ways, but we all know the history of how, you know, how we thought about pot, right? No, helping people all over the place. And so that's a great organization to work with. We enjoy working with them, and, you know, it's that's the kind of thing we're looking for more. Yeah.
That's awesome. I don't want to take up too much of your time here, so kind of start wrapping up, I guess. But I do have two questions, and then a really quick one. Anything with the cannabis one? Like, is there anything unique about that particular project when it comes to efficiency or energy? I mean, I'm assuming if they're cultivating there, then there's lots of water systems and lighting systems and things like that. Anything that really kind of caught you as fun while designing that?
They're working really, really hard to make sure that that they can use LED lighting instead of HID. HID is high intensity discharge. It's what for when I was a lighting designer, you know, a long time ago, HID was like, oh, it's so great. It's energy efficient, and it's, you know, and fraction of the wattage of old incandescent light bulbs and fluorescent, much better. Now, like, that stuff makes so much heat and uses so much electricity when you're looking at growing that you have to then include HVAC systems that you wouldn't have had. You know, you're putting a mechanical system in there to deal with the lighting system you put in there.
Mm-hmm.
How stupid is that, right?
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a Band-Aid. Yeah.
like you solved one problem and you created another problem with it. So now you're going to solve that by throwing something else on that, which, by the way, is going to take your energy usage up. So if everybody does that, we've created another problem.
Right.
We've created a societal problem. Don't do that. And so their point of view is that, you know, well, you want to do, you know, LED lighting. It's not inexpensive, so it's a bit of a challenge for their bottom line to go through the process, and hopefully they'll be able to.
And hopefully the payback, you know, over time will help with that upfront cost. I mean, I know from the cost perspective, that's always one of those things is to get buy-in on the front end. You have to do a lot of work with folks that either don't have the budget or, you know, aren't at that conscious place that you are, and, you know, that some people are. Well, cool. Yeah, that sounds interesting. So this is one question, but two parts. What's something that's really exciting for you right now? You know, some sort of either technology or material or methodology that's that you think is really about to sort of spring out into you know, bigger scale, and then also, and maybe I should have asked it around the other way around, but what's the biggest challenge when it comes to incorporating sustainability, conscious architecture, energy efficiency? We've talked about cost, obviously, so I'm assuming that's up there, but are there any other challenges that you've found in trying to institute some of these sustainability principles in your designs and in your buildings? So maybe start with the challenge and then go with the exciting things.
Yeah, I'll go with that one first. Right. I think the biggest challenges today, at least in California, I'll speak for California because that's where we're doing most of our work. And the regulations in California are such that we are almost designing to, we are in fact designing to a moderate level, at least, of LEED certification and those other qualifiers out there. So from that point of view, we kind of do it. Right. Thankfully, right. Mm-hmm. It's in the code. You have to. Mm-hmm. So the challenge with this is that there still is an historical and a kind of a cultural position against that, or a cultural position maybe to question it and look at it as as a sort of in the realm of positives and negatives on a project, it's in the negative side of the line. It's under the line.
Having
right?
a LEED certified building.
Having to do that, still
Yeah.
viewed like that stuff costs,
Hmm.
right? So that is still kind of the issue in most of our projects, is that there's still in sort of embedded, undercurrent of language that is like fearful, concern, not really clear what it actually means. Think maybe it's a little bit of hooey still, that kind of thing still exists.
So do you change your language then when you're talking to people and throwing some of those ideas out there? I mean, similar to what you did, way back with the CFO and the credit union. I mean, do you just sort of stay away from certain terms and kind of like only give 70% of the information and like hold a little bit close to the breast what's your approach?
Client selection, our client selection is clients selecting us. That relationship, how it builds, really helps us avoid a lot of that, I think.
Cool.
Fortunately, but it's also some things you just do, some things you don't, and other things you say, we're doing this because we have to. Like a project, and residential projects these days too. At a certain scale, have to do LID, low impact development work to their site. Where's the water going? Is there water going off site? How is it being stored on site? How's that first flush of a rainstorm? Where, all that kind of stuff. And so those things, like if you're an owner and you wanted to, do something to your building or your home, and suddenly an agency saying, I'm sorry, but you have to spend $50,000 more to put the system in. That's a negative. Like, why are you doing that? I pay my taxes. This is a terrible thing you're making us do.
Right.
So there still is a sort of an institutional or a cultural level of worry, fear, cost threshold way of looking at things. Those are the challenges I think we see today. We don't see challenges in terms of people understanding that the planet's better for it, and it kind of is the right thing to do. Maybe you really believe it's the right thing to do. People want to do recycling. People get water quality. They get all the concepts of it. But when you come down to like bottom line, I have to write checks for this stuff. That's where it gets dicey. The first question you asked.
Yeah.
What I think is really exciting today, and I'll point out two sources if anybody wants to, watching this, wants to think more about this. I think we're going to very quickly, and I mean quickly like the next 10 years, get past a point of thinking about how we build buildings the old way, which is, basically today. You get all the parts and you nail them and you bolt them together. That's today. It's been like that forever.
Stick built, essentially.
Stick built.
Yeah.
Or even pouring concrete. You have to buy the concrete and you have to put it in the form, and all manual, right? That's been mankind. That's a human story, right? That's how we built.
Right.
Okay, now we're really talking about 3D printing a building. Okay, so now there's a machine, computer controlled, designed by people who are designing the building, and all that, and it makes the building. Great, except that all of our buildings don't really want to look like sausages lined up. Like that's got a certain kind of traction to it, certain limitations to it. It can evolve more, but I think where this is going is that we're going to grow our buildings. And that to me is the most exciting thing. And I'll point to MIT's Mediated Matter Lab, run by Neri Oxnard, and Cooper Hewitt Museum. Great sources of information on this. And I love them both. They're really at the forefront of both researching and devising ways to take Neri Oxnard and her team. If you might, and I don't know if you've seen this already, but if anybody does it, looks up YouTube on it, you can see how they built a room using silkworms. Wow. So they create a framework and they put silkworms around it, and the silkworms basically, covered the whole thing, because that's what a silkworm does. It builds this cocoon where you could sort of trick the silkworm into doing it this way across a surface. And that's taking nature and doing something with it, building a space with it. That's one example, right? They're doing all these other things, which are essentially taking organic approaches to building. So Cooper Hewitt looks for those kinds of examples, and it promotes them. This is very cool museum in New York that actually puts a lot of stuff out there that is sort of partly it's in that kind of space. So that's where I think it's going.
So you think within the next 10 years, even though everything I've read says it takes 10 years to develop a product and then another 10 years to bring it to market. So you think maybe we've sped that process along slightly now, or the need of the times is such that there's more energy and therefore more sort of expediency with some of these ideas?
I think that I think maybe that's crazy optimism on the one hand, and I'll
that's great. I love it.
Up for that. But I would also say that as we look back in our histories, the times where we made monumental change, and particularly like right now, when we have done it, we've done it because there was an urgency. Oftentimes that was a crisis, which could have been like the nature of the crisis we're facing right now, pandemic. But it's just, I think, a testament to human nature to shift when we really need to shift. And we don't have the planet saying it's collapsing on us, we better fix it fast. We still have the planet saying that, well, I think the planet's saying, if you guys don't make it, I really don't care, right? Like if you humans don't make it, that's okay. Well, I'll still be here on the planet. That kind of thing is an issue where we can kind of continue to live on and on and on without facing it. But I think there are enough people who are saying, no, we have got to shift. So I'm hopeful that there's more shift that takes place so that the work that people like that are doing can take hold. A year or two ago, we were not really talking about 3D printing homes, or buildings. And in that short amount of time, it's in the everyday of what we architects and engineers see coming out there. So that's pretty fast. So I hope so.
That's awesome. My name's Ian Sollenberger. I've been talking with Drew Pedrick. I'll let him do one last little plug for his architecture firm and anything else, any other websites or anything you want to throw out there. But I just think it's cool that, this conversation is happening. I agree with you that this is a time where we have a real opportunity to shift the focus from the way things have been to the way things could be. And so I just really appreciate your being here and joining me in that conversation. Why don't you close us out here, and then I'll say goodbye.
Oh, Ian, thank you very much. First of all, thank you enormously for inviting me on as a guest on your podcast, on this show. It's really great. It's really a great honor from my point of view to be a part of this. You and I have talked about sustainability and specifics with projects for as long as we've known each other, and so it's really a wonderful opportunity to see this grow and promote and get out to more people, and so that more people can hear and think and communicate back.
Contribute. Exactly. That's the mandate, really.
Yeah.
It's like help us out. Tell us those new ideas so we can, if we don't know them, we can get them out there and other people can know about them too.
Yeah, and that's what I really did not intend to come on and plug my business. I will only say that I've been doing this for 39 years actually, and got a lot more. I just love it, and I am very passionate about what I'm doing. I think there are enormous changes that are continuing to unfold, and I'm really excited to be a part of that. So I am really hoping to find more people that are like-minded to work with, and to develop more projects and do more kinds of design and architecture and planning, placemaking, helping people to live, with the planet and with each other, and in these ways. So thank you very much for your time. For having me.
What is your? I'll put it in the show notes too. But what is your website?
It's McTigue.net, MCTIGUE.net.
Perfect.
And,
so if you want to get in touch with Drew,
email me at Pedrick, APEDRICK @McTigue.net, and I will look forward to that very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening, and thank you, Drew.
Thank you. Take care.
Building the Future, Green Building in the New Millennium, brought to you by Sustainable Homes of the Future.